Morning, all. All right, so in my season by season video series, we're now up to the 1950-1951 season. The Detroit Red Wings stay first overall. They have a great season. They do not have a great postseason, however. They finished 44-13-13, 101 points, so they are the first National Hockey League team to reach 100 points in a season. 236 goals scored, 139 goals against. They're captained by Sid Abel. The Toronto Maple Leafs finished 41-16-3 with Ted Kennedy as their captain. 95 points for Toronto. 212 goals scored, 138 goals against. Those are the only two teams that finish above the 500 mark that season. Montreal 25-30-15, 65 points, 173 goals scored, 184 goals against. The Boston Bruins, they barely managed to get into the playoffs at 22-30-18. 62 points, 178 goals scored, 197 goals against. The New York Rangers, 20-29-21. So 61 points. They've missed the playoffs by 1 point. 21 ties. Pretty sure that's a record. I don't have that on the board, but I don't think I've written down 21 ties for anybody to this point. Frank Edels is the captain for the Rangers, as Milt Schmidt was for Boston. Did I get Schmidt? I don't think I did. 169 goals scored for the Rangers, 201 goals against. And bringing up the rear, the Chicago Blackhawks, 13-47-10, captained by Jack Stewart. 36 points. They're 171 goals scored, not too far off from like Boston, Montreal, or the Rangers. But the 280 goals against, that's a problem. So that causes Chicago to end up finishing last. As I said, the Detroit Red Wings, the first team to ever reach 100 points in a season. And they did this without Harry Lumley, their starting goaltender. They traded him. And they did so because they believed Terry Sawchuk was ready for the starting job. And boy, was he ever. The Wings actually give Sawchuk the $1,000 he would have earned as the Vezina winner, even though he doesn't win the Vezina. They're so impressed with how he played that season, they give him the $1,000 bonus. So, NHL not always cheap. The Rangers are having their struggles and they get desperate. So they try hypnosis. Yep, they try hypnosis to get this team out of the funk that they were in. It doesn't work. The hypnotist comes back with blaming Chuck Rayner, the goaltender for the New York Rangers, that he wasn't really able to reach out to him. So, much like in that Simpsons episode with the baseball team, he did a good job. The hypnotist wasn't his fault. I don't know if any of the Rangers thought they were a chicken after, but there we are. Bill Barilko, a legend in Toronto Maple Leaf circles, he actually scores the Cup winner in the Stanley Cup final. However, he dies in a plane crash that summer. So, tragic story there because Barilko was seen as being a future superstar in the league, and we'll never know what he might have been able to do. March 7th of 1951, Gordie Howe sets a record. His 75th point, which he records in a 3-0 win against the Leafs, sets a record for right wingers in the National Hockey League points wise. Then March 11th of 1951, as this is a year Red Wings set records, Terry Sawchuk gets his 39th win, which sets an NHL record in the 7-0 win against the Chicago Blackhawks. You'll notice the Blackhawks is two words at this point. It didn't become one word until the 80s. 1951 as well, March the 7th actually, Gordie Howe's 83rd point sets an NHL record, beats Elmer Locke's record in an 8-2 win against the Chicago Blackhawks. So the Hawks on the receiving end of some rough scores, and it definitely boosts the numbers for the Detroit Red Wings. March 31st, 1951, the Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs played to a 1-1 tie in the playoffs. Why? Well, Toronto had a curfew of midnight, so if they had started the second overtime, which would have run past midnight, it would have technically been illegal, and so they had to stop the game in a 1-1 tie, which is just odd. I don't know that I've seen that on the board. Outside of, during World War II, fine, they had restrictions on movement. That's why they got rid of overtime, but a curfew in Toronto. Who knew? The Ebug is also introduced. This is the year that the emergency backup goaltenders brought in, so you have to make sure you have somebody in the building to serve as a number 3, just in case the starter and the backup are both hurt during the game. So the NHL decides we'd rather not put a defenseman in the net or a forward in the net. We'd rather have an emergency backup. Jean Beliveau and Boom Boom Geoffrion make their debut that season for the Habs. And so Montreal, while they're third and Their record's not great. Things are going to get a lot better for them soon because Beliveau and Geoffrion, they're quite the players. Maurice Richard. So Rocket Richard is greatly beloved in this day and age. But boy, if he had been around now, I don't know how beloved he would have been, to be honest. Because there's a lot of incidents that involve him punching officials and high sticking people viciously. He was a vicious player. So Richard's ejected after taking a poke at the linesman, Jim Primo. So he's kicked out of that game. The next morning, in that hotel where everybody's sticking around, Maurice Richard happens to come across the officials from the night before. Kind of gets up in their face. There's really loud words exchanged. He grabs them by their jacket and just in general has kind of a public meltdown at the officials from the night before. And so Clarence Campbell catches wind of this and decides, as president of the NHL, he can't have that. So he fines Maurice Richard $500 over the incident. But it's not the last time that Clarence Campbell and Maurice Richard are gonna end up clashing. And so Rocket Richard had quite the temperament. Again, if he had played today, I don't know how beloved he would have been. Now, he would have been beloved in Montreal, absolutely. Everywhere else, not so sure. Pat Egan, the last active former New York American player, plays his last game that year. So that's it for New York Americans, and now players that are left over, they are ones that have only played in the original six era. So Gordie Howe's the leading scorer in the NHL that year by a lot. 70 games, 43 goals, 43 assists, 86 points. That's how you do it. Maurice Richard second, 65 games, 42 goals, 24 assists, 66 points. Max Bentley of Toronto, 67 games, 21 goals, 41 assists, 62 points. Sid Abel in Detroit, 69 games, 23 goals, 38 assists, 61 points. Milt Schmidt in Boston, 62 games, 22 goals, 39 assists for 61 points. Ted Kennedy in Toronto, 63 games, 18 goals, 43 assists, 61 points. And Ted Lindsay in Detroit, 67 games, 24 goals, 35 assists, 59 points. So the production line has three of the top six spots here, three of the top seven spots in scoring. So still pretty good year for them. In goal, my face will wake up at some point. Terry Sawchuk, 44, 13, and 13, 1.97 goals against, and 11 shutouts. He's a rookie. Al Rollins, 26, 6, and 7, 1.77 goals against, 5 shutouts. The Leafs wanted to get Rollins and Turk Broda's name on the Vezina Trophy, and the NHL said no. So remember, the Vezina at this point goes to the lowest goals against. So since it's a team award, there are years where multiple goaltenders win it. Jerry McNeil in Montreal, 25, 30, and 15 record, 2.61 goals against and 6 shutouts. Jack Gelano in Boston, 22, 30, and 18, 2.81 goals against and 4 shutouts. The Hart Trophies won by Milt Schmidt in Boston. The Art Ross is won by Gordie Howe in Detroit, of course. The Calder is won by Terry Sawchuk in Detroit. The Vezina goes to Al Rollins of the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Lady Byng goes to Red Kelly of the Detroit Red Wings. So the Red Wings clean up pretty well at the awards. They're pretty well represented in the All-Star teams that year too. So your first team All-Stars, Milt Schmidt in Boston. There's a tie for second team All-Star in the voting. Ted Kennedy and Sid Abel. So Kennedy of Toronto, Sid Abel of Detroit. Your first line right winger is Gordie Howe. Your second line right winger is Maurice Richard. Those are both pretty good names. On the left side, Ted Lindsay of Detroit is your first team All-Star, and Sid Smith of Toronto's second team. On the blue line, Red Kelly of Detroit, and Bill Quackenbush of Boston. So Quackenbush is up on the first team. Second team is Jim Thompson for the Toronto Maple Leafs and Leo Rise of the Detroit Red Wings. In net, Terry Sawchuk for the Red Wings, Chuck Rayner for the New York Rangers, the second team All-Star behind Sawchuk's first team All-Star. So, yeah, Terry Sawchuk kind of takes over the record book that year and has a tremendous start to his career. In the playoffs, it's still 1 versus 3, 2 versus 4, of course, during the original 6 era. And Montreal plays Detroit. Montreal wins the first game in Detroit in 4 overtimes, 3-2. They win the second game in triple overtime, 1-0. So those are long games right there. Montreal loses at home 2-0 and then loses at home 4-1 to even the series. So they can't assert themselves at home. Montreal wins in Detroit 5-2, so they get all 3 wins in Detroit. and then they win Game 6 at home 3-2 to win the series in 6 games. Boston and Toronto. Boston beats Toronto 2-0 in the first game. It's a 1-1 tie in Toronto in the second game, of course. Toronto then goes into Boston and wins both games by scores of 3-0 and 3-1. Toronto then wins the next game 4-1 at home before going into going into Boston, and the Leafs win that one 6-0 to win the series in 6 technically, but it's 4-1, although I guess it's 4-1-1. Then in the final, it's Montreal and Toronto. So the age-old rivalry there. Montreal, Toronto go to overtime in all 5 games, and it favors Toronto. 3-2 win for Toronto in the first game. Montreal wins the second game 3-2. Toronto then goes into Montreal and wins 2-1 and 3-2 respectively to take a 3-1 series lead before closing it out at home 3-2 with that overtime winner from Barilko. 4-1 series win for Toronto. Richard's the leading scorer in the playoffs that year, 11 games, 9 goals, 4 assists, 13 points. Max Bentley, 11 games, 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points for Toronto. And Sid Smith, 11 games, 7 goals, 3 assists, 10 points for him. Turk Broda had a 1.1 goals against average, so he takes over in the playoffs. Rollins had a 1.71 record. So, yeah, Al Rollins was nowhere near as good at 1.71 goals against average. Broda had a 1.1. So, yeah, Toronto's defense pretty good at that point. Goaltending too. And they win another Stanley Cup. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.